welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, U.S. presidential candidates Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton hurled almost as many insults as they did ideas during their second debate on Sunday. I will ask our panelists their take on what some consider as the embarrassing event. Former Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Guterres is set to become the next UN Secretary General. I'll ask our panelists if they think he has what it takes to lead the world's most influential international organization. Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump faced off Sunday night in what has been called the ugliest presidential debate in U.S. history. The event was filled with embarrassing accusations, angry responses, and hostile attacks by both candidates. Before our discussion, let's take a look at some of the key moments from the debate.
It began without a handshake and continued with a series of heated exchanges.
Oh yeah. What about the other 15,000?
Please allow her to respond. She didn't talk while you talked.
The second debate between Democrat Hillary Clinton and Republican Donald Trump came just days after the release of a 2005 tape of Trump making lewd comments about women.
I moved on her, actually. You know, she was down in Palm Beach. I moved on her, and I failed. I'll admit it. Whoa. I did try and her. She was married.
Trump began with an apology.
This was locker room talk. I'm not proud of it. I apologize to my family. I apologize to the American people.
But Clinton said the remarks show he is not fit to be president.
And he has said that the video doesn't represent who he is. But I think it's clear to anyone who heard it that it represents exactly who he is.
The two clashed over Syria, with Trump contradicting his running mate, who last week called for U.S. military intervention against Syrian government forces.
Your 2 minutes
I don't like Assad at all, but Assad is killing ISIS. Russia is killing ISIS, and Iran is killing ISIS. And those three have now lined up because of our weak foreign policy.
Clinton says no to U.S. ground forces in Syria, but supports arming Kurdish rebels. A Muslim American asked candidates about Islamophobia in the U.S. Trump repeated his calls for the U.S. to severely limit immigration from Muslim countries. Clinton says that's a mistake.
We are not at war with Islam, and it is a mistake, and it plays into the hands of the terrorists to act as though we are. So I want a country where citizens like you and your family are just as welcome as anyone else.
Clinton's use of a private email server while Secretary of State has dogged her through the campaign. Trump says if he becomes president, he will appoint a special prosecutor to investigate.
You know, it's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
It's unheard of in the United States that a major presidential candidate would threaten to jail a political rival. Trump entered the debate with plummeting poll numbers and some key Republicans pulling support. His performance seems to have at least stopped the bleeding. The question now, will prominent Republicans stay by his side? With only about 4 weeks to go before the election, Trump has a lot of ground to make up to catch Hillary Clinton. Jim Spellman, CCTV, Washington.
Thanks to our report coming from Washington. But now joining us about the U.S. presidential election and what's next. Not just about the second debate anymore. What's next? We're having Mr. Rick Dunham, Director of Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University, and Professor Fu Jun from Peking University with us. In Washington, D.C., we have Professor Christopher Chambers, Professor of Journalism at Georgetown University. Welcome to the three of you, gentlemen. Here, we're not talking about the second debate because we don't really want to go into any of those details about the insults between the two of them. I don't want to repeat any of them, but let's focus on this. Mr. Dunham. How certain, given the poll numbers, can we think about now the next president of the United States? Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump?
Hillary Clinton, almost certainly, but in this year where everything's been unpredictable and all the rules have been thrown out the window, I would say it's not guaranteed. I'd say about 98% chance that she would win because she's so far ahead in the swing states. She's moved ahead in some Republican states. Donald Trump is only competitive right now in one of the key swing states.
Is it more, Professor Chambers, about saving face for Mr. Trump at this moment, leading up to the presidential eventually election? or he still has some chance to turn it back?
Well, it's a little of both. He does have a chance, and as Rick Dunham said, you know, we can't predict the future. He has galvanized a huge following. Some people, particularly in the minority community, have called it white nationalism that has maybe some fascist roots. He even has Klansmen in his camp, but he has galvanized a lot of people who don't usually vote, who are extremely angry. And these people can tip the scales in certain states. Now, however, at the same time, because prominent Republicans, many of whom are very conservative themselves, seem to be in some kind of civil war with him now, it might not be a saving face sort of situation, but revenge. He has now said that the shackles are now off of him, and that's a direct quote from the Republican Party.
I see.
And that's a very scary thought.
Mr. Dunham, Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, both the names may not be that familiar to our international audience, but certainly well-known Republican names in the United States, two establishments. They have denounced Trump's words, but never said, since they started supporting his presidential candidacy, never said that they are against it. Until now. They've never done that. So what does that mean?
It means they're in a difficult position. You mentioned the two leaders of the Republicans in Congress, the House and the Senate, and they're both afraid that they will lose their control that they have right now. The Senate Republican majority is very tenuous. There are a lot of very close races, and if things get worse for Trump, if he goes to war, if the shackles are off and he starts attacking them, they could lose Congress. So they want to denounce what he's saying that moderate voters, that swing voters dislike, but they're afraid of alienating his supporters, because if these hardcore Republicans don't vote for the Republicans for Congress, the Democrats could win everything.
What are we thinking about, Professor Chambers? Is it the president, the position of the president, the White House, or is it really the GOP's future that we are talking about here?
It's both. It's the leadership of the
country. You can't sit on the fences, sir. You can't do that.
Well, I mean, but that's what makes it so unpredictable and makes 2016 such a crazy year. I mean, you know, we've seen it overseas in the Brexit vote in England. I mean, we cannot discount certain other factors, and so we are seeing a fight for the soul of the Republican Party as it relates to control of the White House. The last time we saw a fight for control of a political party and it translating to the White House was in 1860, when our political parties disintegrated, and Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States, and we descended into civil war. So the fate of one political party is indeed, can be tied to the White House and American history.
Professor Fu, you've been attentively listening to the other two panelists coming from the U.S. Of course, the scenes that we saw these years with the presidential debate in the U.S., unprecedented, shall I say, in my journalism career. But may I ask you, as one of those Chinese elites, intellectuals, watching those debates, and watching the debates going on in the American society in response to the two presidential candidates, what do you make of it?
Well, I guess because of the very powerful image of visual stuff, TVs, internets, popular view tend to be fragmented. And with that background, people's view tend to be very extreme. So it's not just the candidates, it's the population that make the presidential campaign
you think
so
that's dangerous
special.
To you? Or not?
In a way, we should be very tentative of that. I guess this is a very critical variable in terms of the technology of new media. As far as I see the candidates, they are normal, but they represent some of the voices that people want to hear. So that in order to make them very appealing to the people, they have to be very extreme. Now, you are talking about some people sort of backing on the Republican side. My reading of that is if you read the polls, chances are, not chances, the probability is very high for Hillary Clinton to win if you read the polling. And the Republican has a soul to sell. The Republican Party tend to be a conservative party. They have core values to defend. So in that sense, it makes sense for some people sort of to back down a little bit.
Well, earlier, as the two gentlemen have just discussed from the U.S., the polls, yes, does suggest certain directions, but this is a very hilarious year politically. Therefore, a lot of things could happen. So what are some of the uncertain factors, Mr. Dunham, given your rich experience in journalism and your rich experience covering presidential elections at this moment?
Well, there's something called the October surprise.
Yes.
People are always waiting.
We're already in October.
And we've already had two. That Donald Trump probably didn't pay federal income tax for 20 years, and his what he calls the locker room talk. We already know that there are many more tape recordings of him from his days as a TV star, and we could have tapes. We could have more conversations. There are also women who have accused him of sexual misconduct. They could come forward. I mean, I'm not saying it is true, but they could come forward. Yeah. On the Hillary Clinton side, you have the Russian government just released another batch of hacked tapes of some of her top advisors saying very embarrassing things, and transcripts of some of her behind closed door meetings that had her talking about taking public positions and private positions. So there are these unpredictable things. You have unprecedented Russian government involvement in an American election and more leaks possible, and then there are just so many things that could happen. And then Donald Trump's own behavior. He could do something unpredictable.
Well, of course, at this moment, Russia denied its direct involvement in any of those elections, but of course, that's something between the United States and
Yes.
Russia. Having said that, though, Professor Chambers, besides what Mr. Dunham just said, what are some of the other uncertain factors from a communications perspective?
Well, you have a situation where Hillary Clinton does have a lot of, as they say, feet on the ground, soldiers on the ground, if you will, in various states helping out the campaign. At the same time, though, you have a very strong mass media message from Trump getting out to get out the vote in various swing states among his core supporters. And again, a lot of those core supporters don't include minorities, etc., but mostly blue-collar, working or poor white people who have not really seen a candidate that excites them, although they do hate Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. So there's a mass media message out there that is counter to Hillary Clinton's more bureaucratic machine on the ground, and that could ironically could turn out more votes than the machine on the ground. So that's one of the variables that we have to watch. Can that message bring people out to vote? And it looks like in certain circles it will, but it might not be enough to beat Hillary Clinton.
I see. On the other hand, we also see some weird phenomena, if I could use that word, Mr. Dunham. That is, you see Donald Trump against his vice president candidate in terms of foreign policy and even some of domestic policies. You also see Hillary Clinton against Barack Obama.
Yes.
Two of them are Democrats. They serve both in one term at least. So you see a lot of crisscross argument and accusations against one another between parties, within parties, between individuals, just among even supposed to be allies.
Right.
At least for the moment.
It is very unusual to have a presidential candidate disavow his vice presidential candidate, which is what Donald Trump did in this debate about Syria policy. I've never seen that happen before. And even saying, I never talked to him. Hillary Clinton disagreeing with Barack Obama, that is a double-edged sword. It is often common that candidates distance themselves from the unpopular parts of their party's president. And Al Gore did that. George Bush the first did that with Reagan. Right. But Obama's very popular, so it's dangerous to distance her from him.
There's another weird phenomenon, Professor Chambers. The U.S. media have been heatedly talking about this over the past 24 hours since the debate. That is, one of those candidates is talking about publicly of putting another candidate into jail once he is in power or in the White House. Not to mention whether he has this legal power or not, but these kind of words publicly, what kinds of messages does it really send to the American public and also about the American system?
It sends the right message to his supporters, which is primarily why he said that, whether he has the power or not, whether he would even do that or not. That was primarily to galvanize the troops, basically, almost as a pep talk. So it had that purpose. But he has said things like this in the past, and various right-wing newspapers, etc., have suggested this. I think it's something that is unprecedented. It has never happened before. It actually didn't even happen in 1860 when we were on the verge of a civil war. Nobody wanted to jail Abraham Lincoln before the war started. I mean, this is unprecedented. This is why you've seen Republicans, not just moderates, but others move away from him, not just on the sexual comments. So it is, you know, you've even had some former U.S. Attorney Generals, not just Democrats, who have said, whoa, 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 we shouldn't really talk, people shouldn't talk about this. This is embarrassing for the country, and it has other nations looking at America and saying, you know, what have you become?
Well, other nations...
And indeed, some say...
Other nations are looking at America. For example, China.
Well, yes.
Professor Fu, two things. One is, what does this, if I could use the adjective interesting, if not chaotic process in the American election this year, what kind of message does it send to us here in China and the rest of the world? And secondly, we have heard a lot of rule of law in the United States, but one of the candidates who could blindly talk about putting another candidate into jail once he is in the office. Of course, he could elaborate with his kinds of personality, but he said that, and he's one of the presidential candidates. So what kind of message does it really send about America to the rest of the world, to China, for example?
Well, as a Chinese, for me to watch the presidential election in the United States, I have to say I'm very sorry to see that to a very significant degree that the debates of a presidential election has been reduced to personal attacks and to use such extreme wording to phrase the points that they want to make. And I think, well, as I'm a Chinese, I have to say I'm very sorry to see that. And the United States has been regarded as a symbol of rule of law. And under those circumstances, you do not use those extreme phrases, especially in the presidential campaign.
Professor Chambers, before I go to Mr. Duncombe, let me ask you about this. For those of you who are now in Washington, for those of you who belongs to the so-called elite of the U.S., for those of you who have been, together with many others around the world, responsible for building the future of the world, what kind of electoral process do you think that the U.S. should have? And what kind of messages does this presidential election so far send to you? Is there going to be some soul searching in Washington, elsewhere in the U.S., so that the system could be better and you will have a more respectable presidential campaign process?
I think that there will be soul searching after the election. Unfortunately, it will only last maybe 6 months, and then we'll go back to what
you're already very optimistic, sir, I have to say.
Yes, I mean, we're not going to see us go to a parliamentary system where you have different factions and smaller parties. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that you know, every now and then in the United States we have these confrontations and these kinds of factionalism, and it has to work itself out. I don't know whether that's going to happen this time, but I'm not optimistic. Given the level of hatred that you have now for Hillary Clinton, if she's elected, there will be those problems. I don't see the Republican Party knitting itself back together again anytime soon. So it's going to be a very difficult time for us. And it's embarrassing for us in the eyes of the rest of the world.
Mr. Dutton, as a journalist yourself, you saw the Florida voting, counting the votes. Yes, indeed. You've seen some of the earlier debates of who exactly should be the president, and now you see an interesting presidential election process. Should the system be updated? Has it kept up with what's going on?
The answer is it should be updated. It has not kept up. It's very hard to change.
But what are the options?
The options would be a national primary, would be, if we're talking theoretically, where you would have, let's just say around the beginning of September, each party chooses a candidate. If there's no candidate who gets a majority, they have a runoff to choose the candidate, something like that. The problem is that the system is so deeply ingrained with 2 small states leading the way, and then this process that lasts 6 months, that you can't unilaterally change it. Congress could not pass a law that would do that. So it's really unrealistic. What's more realistic is the 2 parties control their own system, nominating system. The Republicans will change it so someone like Donald Trump couldn't get the nomination while he's winning these primaries with 30% of the vote.
Right.
They want to make sure that somebody gets more support to win the nomination.
Professor Fu, from outside the United States, we cannot do anything about the election because that's really the American people's election. They have to decide their own fate. Having said that, though, what should be the takeaway as we, the rest of the world, watch that presidential election takes place in the U.S.?
My take for this year's presidential campaign is that the process has remained the same. Contents has changed. The population of the United States has probably changed on the margin thanks to immigration policy and thanks to globalization. Now, globalization here is a big variable that has given rise to all kinds of changes. My observation again is capital has gained tremendously, whereas labor, not in the United States, everywhere in the world, are relatively looser. And the elites, policymakers in the United States and in other parts of the world should have a process of soul searching so that they should make more sensible policies to narrow the gap between the rich and the poor. Otherwise, the prospect of global economy continue to move forward will be in doubt. So this is the key issue that Americans as well as people in other parts of the world should consider very seriously.
And now we are really going to the election, less than a month. So we talked about the variables earlier, but there's one thing. Earlier absentee ballots in some of the key states could already, in a way, tell where the picture is going for the 2 presidential candidates. Mr. Danton, very briefly, 15 seconds if you can, help us to understand that a little bit, and what are some of the signs we could study right now about the future?
Well, we could see how many people are voting. I've already voted in Beijing, and many people around the country.
You don't have to tell us who you voted for, by the way.
No. But a lot of people around the United States have voted already. 1/3 of people will have voted before that final week. So the election really has started already. It's not November 8th.
Okay, and Professor Chambers, what could be the next step, do you think, the constituencies in the U.S. are watching about the 2 candidates? Very briefly from you as well.
I don't think anybody's going to be looking to the next debate. I think what people are trying to see now is whether the Republican Party will continue this schism, will continue this civil war, and the backdrop of that is, will that make Donald Trump a little more wild and unpredictable, and then will Hillary Clinton keep on her current kind of course and basically kind of hang back and let him make the mistakes, or will she have to come out in front of some of the email hacks and be more concrete on policy and get the vote out, frankly?
Well, you said nobody's going to watch the 3rd debate. Wow, what about the TV ratings? But thank you so much for the 3 of you, gentlemen, for being with us and share your insights about the ongoing U.S. presidential election. Rick Danton, Fu Jun, Christopher Chambers, thank you so much, gentlemen, the 3 of you, for being with us. Really appreciate it. Stay with us here on World Insight, still to come. Former Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Guterres is set to become the next UN Secretary General. I will ask my panelists if they think he has what it takes to lead the world's most influential international organization. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News, coming to you live from Beijing. We turn now to New York, where the UN Security Council has backed the former Prime Minister of Portugal, Antonio Guterres, to become the UN's next Secretary General. The current Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, says Guterres is an excellent choice. I will ask my panelists if they agree, but first, this background story.
Mr. Antonio Guterres be appointed Secretary General of the United Nations for a term of office from January 1, 2017 to December 31, 2021.
Many analysts were surprised by Guterres' rise to the United Nations' highest post. There were high expectations that the world's biggest international organization would elect a woman for the first time. But after 6 straw polls, a 67-year-old politician from Europe managed to earn the most votes. Guterres served as Prime Minister of Portugal from 1995 to 2002. During his time in office, he supported international efforts to resolve the East Timor crisis. From 2005 to 2015, Guterres acted as the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. As High Commissioner, he led efforts to ease the massive migrant crisis in the Middle East. Guterres is also actively involved with Socialist International, a global organization of social democratic political parties. And now Guterres is preparing to become the 9th leader of the world's largest intergovernmental organization.
Gratitude, but also humility. Humility when facing the dramatic problems of today's world, and humility that is needed to serve, and especially to serve those that are most vulnerable, the victims of conflict, of terrorism, the victims of the violation of rights, the victims of poverty and the injustices of this world.
Guterres will face a number of international challenges while chief at the UN. War and hunger has forced an estimated 65 million people to flee their homes around the world. The Syrian conflict has resulted in the deaths of over 500,000 people. Terrorist groups are becoming increasingly international, spreading their terror to new countries and regions around the globe. The first UN Secretary General once described his role as the most impossible job in the world. The statement is as true today as it was back then.
For more about this, the new UN Secretary General, we are joined here in Beijing studio, Professor Wang Yiwei, and he is a professor and also director of the Institute of International Affairs, Renmin University. And also in Paris, we have Professor Joab Toker, professor at the American Graduate School in Paris. Welcome to both of you, professors. Well, we all understand, let's just be frank here. The UN Secretary General is a position that is made of qualities and compromises. So is this specific gentleman now to be in the office? Professor Toker, what do you make of this final compromise among all the members of the Security Council?
Well, I wouldn't get into the intricacies of the corridors of the UN building in New York because it depasses my capabilities, I agree.
Okay.
So I ask again, the CCTV viewers to pardon me for that. But honestly, I don't think it's important anymore once apparently the official vote confirming his nomination as UN Secretary General is about to take place in less than 1 week. And it is the General Assembly which we vote. So if there are no surprises, and usually there are no surprises in this kind of procedures, he is the next one. Now, what do I make in terms of balancing between quality and compromises? I would say that that's very much the tradition of the UN headquarters, and in a way, rightly so. I would even provoke perhaps the politically correct discourse and say, let's find this way. We have to understand that the UN is a very particular, even awkward sort of international body, the most important international body on the international scene, but which functions in somehow and often in an awkward way. So it's a fine balance.
Okay.
It's a fine balance between an experienced politician and one who has the experience on the terrain regarding refugees and humanitarian issues.
Got your point. What about you, Professor Wang? What about the qualities of this one, Mr. Guterres, to be the UN Secretary General? He's focused on refugee issues. He's focused on socialist political parties earlier in his career. How much is that going to equip him with the capabilities to be the UNSG?
Well, quality. Of course, he's qualified leader. He led 10 years of the Commission of Refugees. This is an urgent challenge for international community. And at the same time, he was approved by all the permanent members of the Security Council. This is very important. Other qualified candidates, like Bokova, also from Europe, is also her lady, but cannot accept by the United States because accept Palestine as a member of the UNESCO. So, quality of course is important, but compromise among the P5 is most important.
Yes, indeed. And now, this new Secretary General to be in the office is going to face similar challenge, if not more, of his predecessors. For example, how is he going to balance the interests between the one who has selected him or elected him into the office and the many of those who are vulnerable and he should speak for as the UN Secretary General? Very interestingly, we have several people talk about this leading up to his coming into the office. For example, the United Nations Director at Human Rights Watch, Mr. Luis Capono, he said this: the next UN Secretary General will be judged on his ability to stand up to the very powers that selected him, whether on Syria, Yemen, South Sudan, the refugee crisis, climate change, or any other problems that comes his way. And of course, that's only one of those quotes illustrating the complicated task this UN Secretary General is going to have. We are not, Professor Wang, in a very peaceful year. Not likely in the next few years to come. So this UN Secretary General is going to, is going to face wars, big power changes, refugee crisis, which is already evolving. So together with some of the traditional challenges facing the UN, what kind of strategy do you think when he comes into the office he has to focus on?
Well, yeah, directly this is an uncertain world. Not any single country, even authority can deal with the challenge. Even United States leadership also declining. So United Nations, this as the post-World War II international organization, also relatively declining, cannot deal with so many challenges. Today it's not about refugees, so many civil wars, but about the billions of people joining globalization, industrialization. So the traditional mechanism, international organization cannot deal with this. Most importantly, the old mentality cannot solve this problem. So the world is witnessing a dramatic change. The power division, transformation, many challenges. We just talked about the presidential campaign in the United States.
Indeed.
It's also
unprecedented.
Two candidates also not qualified, to certify of their voters. It's a difficult choice.
Professor Toker, what do you say? For example, we've seen this UN Secretary General is likely to face once in a century or once in several centuries big power relations change. For example, between China and the United States, both of them are UN Security Council permanent members. Two of the P5s. And you also see unprecedented refugee crisis going on inside Europe, terrorism, and also relations among religion, relations among races. These are very much hot button issues that could suddenly erupt at any time. What would you say?
Well, I would say that unfortunately I cannot contradict any of the introductory adjectives you have used in your question in Beijing. You are right. We are certainly facing complicated conflicts, we're facing tragedies, we're facing present crisis which may become even more complicated. We are facing also this unclear linkage between what we said earlier, namely the relations between the numerous relatively weak or less powerful nations of the UN and the several few superpowers who actually try to make their voice and their policies advance. And all that is being channeled through and incarnated through the person of the UN Secretary General. Now, don't forget that neither the UN nor his Secretary, its Secretary General, does not have any formal power in terms of classical power judgments and measurements. The UN has the power that its members would like to invest in him, and the Secretary General has or may have the power that the members of the UN, and mainly the powerful ones of them, would very much like or would not like to invest in him.
Well,
so the key word for that is pragmatism.
Okay.
The optimal Secretary General of the UN yesterday, today, and tomorrow would, I believe, be the most pragmatic one. He or she one day should behave in a particular way when it comes to in Iraq, in a different way when it comes to an African conflict.
Let's talk about pragmatism.
When it comes in conflict.
Yeah, let's talk about pragmatism. When we talk about pragmatism, we have something very concrete to hold on to. 17 Sustainable Development Goals. That has been a blueprint brought out to the rest of the world by the United Nations under the current Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. So how will those blueprints likely to be implemented for the future? Secondly, UN experiencing its own reforms. Well, at the same time, there has been debate about what the UN's role should be in today's world. So with all of these very concrete questions, Professor Wang, how do you think this UN Secretary General should answer those questions?
Well,
once again, a big question. Once again, a big question.
Secretary General of the United Nations has some power. The first power is the power of the ideas, legitimacy. United Nations, the most authoritative international organizations for peace and security. No one can take the place. And secondly, is mediation power, to make a compromise among P5 and other members of the United Security Council. So if a weak Secretary General make the United Nations not so work, bypassed even by the other great superpower, as he mentioned. But it's under his leadership, he can mediate, can make a compromise. United Nations still can work. Particularly, United Nations focus on peace and development. As you mentioned, now many problems, peace, unstable, because of the poverty, because of the gap between rich and the poor. So United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goal, I think this is a great achievement of the last United Nations Security Council. And in China and United States work together, let the Paris climate change deal also pass. This also contributes to the world peace.
Will the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and, for example, the climate change deal between China, United States, and also many countries in the world be able to be encouraging enough for this UN Secretary General, new coming into the office, to rally the crowd and bring forward some of the new developments in your areas? Professor Toker.
Well, it would be too risky for me to say a flat yes or a flat no. I think that it's part of that pragmatism we mentioned 2 minutes earlier. It would be one of the judgments, although we know throughout history and throughout the 70, 80 years of the existence of the UN and the previous League of Nations, that usually the prestige and the level of success of UN Secretary Generals are judged not according to social and climate type issues, but regarding real crisis in the classical sense, wars, tragedies, yes, huge waves of refugees, which unfortunately the planet goes through. So these will be the real judgments, and they're already there on the agenda, and there will be new ones, unfortunately.
Okay.
But still, let's not forget in this cynicism and a bit of pessimism, the fact that on a larger perspective, never ever had the human race or planet Earth equipped with such an organization which, after all, in spite of cynicism, in spite of classical diplomacy, in spite of the game of interest, could make the difference when it really needs to make the difference. Well, this is a big progress, but on a very large scale.
I did read your optimism among the skepticism that you have been expressing. Having said that, though, my final question for both of you, 20 seconds for each, if you can. That is, what is next, because there has been so much debate regarding who should be the Secretary General of the United Nations this time. There's gender debate, there's geopolitical debate, there is geographical debates even as to where they should from, and also there has been enormous amount of debate about the UN's future, who is most suitable. Eventually, this person, Mr. Guterres, what do you make of it, Professor Wang?
I think the urgent issue, challenges driven by 10 years service of the Refugees Agency. This is a top agenda, I think, in the United Nations.
All right. And Professor Toker, briefly, 20 seconds.
Well, I will use my 20 seconds to say that I don't know what is going to happen during the mandate of this new Secretary General, but the real meaningful thing which should be on the agenda is a reform of the UN itself, starting with the Security Council. It's still a very European type organization, and it's not to its advantage.
All right. We have different views, obviously, in our debate. Thank you so much, Joab Toker, Wang Yiwei. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for your individual insights into the issue. Thank you. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.